Welcome to Future-Proof Business, smart strategies, real insights, and tools to lead and scale in a fast-changing world. Let's future-proof your success.
Welcome to Inspired Impact Podcast Show. I'm your host, Daniel Rosenstein. Today I have the honor of interviewing Regina Huber. Regina, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Daniel, it's a pleasure to be here. I am delighted.
Regina, you have a very impressive background. You've been like the CEO of Transform Your Performance. You're a leadership or transformation coach. You live in multiple continents. You're also an author of a few different books. You also help people become thriving leaders in the professional life and also in their personal life as well. We help people regain their freedom, which is really important. So you have a very impressive background. Congratulations on all your success and your accomplishments. I saw that you have a lot of great reviews on Trustpilot.
Yeah, thank you. You're not always active enough to really keep those to date because, of course, you have to nudge people. But they are definitely a wonderful review. So I'm very glad that people are happy with the work I can do with them.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about yourself to share with the audience about yourself and your background?
As you said, I've had a very eclectic life. It's not always been upward. It's not just ups always in our lives. I actually know no one who has a steady upward curve only in their life. So there's a lot of stories. There are a lot of opportunities for growth that are included in that overall story so far of my life. It's been a very eclectic, very adventurous life on several different continents, which has been tremendously enriching to me. And I believe that this also helps me adapt more easily to different clients with different backgrounds. I can coach in several different languages, and it's just really opened up my horizon and the ability to get people.
I want to ask you about that. How has it been like living on 5 different continents? Was it like a really big shift? Because obviously, each place has a very different culture, different language. Was that like a very difficult thing to do, moving to different continents? How has that multicultural experience shaped your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, first of all, yes, I have mostly lived on 3 continents, but I've traveled quite a lot on the African continent more recently, where I have spent several months in several different places, mostly in South Africa, but also Cameroon, Ghana, Uganda, Rwanda, Zanzibar, which would be Tanzania. So that has been a very interesting experience in every single country, of course. And then even in the other countries, because I've lived in Latin America for about 9 years total. And of course, in the US and several European countries. So yes, there's always the adaptability factor, right? We got to adapt to where we move, to where we want to stay for an extended period of time. Even also on short travel, we adapt, right? Ideally, at least. We don't, that doesn't mean we have to become someone else. So that's the important part about it, is to be able to adapt while also staying true to yourself and to who you are, and to really look at each new location, each new culture with discernment. Not everything in a culture is great, as we know, right? So every culture has some things that we might consider positive and some things that we might think they're not so great, okay? So I think this is different for every single person. And we just really want to look at it and say, okay, this is aligned with my values, with who I am, with my beliefs, or at least we have a lot of beliefs that we don't even know of. So it's a different story. But with what I want to be my beliefs, I didn't put it this way. And this is not aligned, right? And it's the same in my own country. Not everything in Germany is preferable to me personally, but there are some things that are absolutely preferable to other places. And then the fifth continent would be, I have done quite a bit of work also in even now pick which one you want to choose, because online I've done more work in Australia, but offline in person, I've done some work in Asia too, and mostly in the Middle East. So the main three continents that I have really worked and lived on are North America, South America, and Europe. And then, of course, yes, I have co-hosted also events and spoken at events and taught workshops and so on the African continent, as well as, for example, also in Qatar. So you asked me about the leadership approach that this informs. I have realized that there are some principles that are valid everywhere, and some others that are more locally impregnated, so to speak. Because, of course, cultures bring their idiosyncrasies to humans, and I need to take that into account, of course, when I speak to people in a different culture, right? So that they can actually receive the message, and so we can have common ground to communicate on. At the same time, there are principles like, for example, in my opinion, at least, bold, heart-centered leadership could be successful anywhere. And a lot of people, of course, think that's maybe weak leadership, but it's actually the opposite. It's courageous leadership to be heart-centered. Also because not everybody dares do it, right? These are some of the ideas that come to mind when I think about different cultures, different locations, and leadership.
So was there like a pivotal moment in your life that inspired you to build like, a transformative performance?
Yeah, so I had moved to Argentina when I left my BCG job twice, actually, because BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, they had hired me back for their San Francisco office after I'd left one time before. And I had been in their San Francisco office in a leadership role for 3.5 years. And I decided I wanted to open a business and not an Airbnb, a bed and breakfast. Airbnb didn't exist back then. So in Argentina, and that decision really changed everything, because that decision put me on the entrepreneurial path. This was my first business. So no more monthly paychecks from BCG. Also not exactly sure what it could even look like. And of course, also a bit naive at the same time, because I hadn't really owned a business before. I moved to Argentina literally with all my savings and a dream in my pocket. And I walked through this experience, right? It wasn't all sweet. And it was quite interesting also dealing with corrupt authorities. We have those everywhere, not just in Argentina, of course. And this business went quite well, except for, yes, I had to deal with those authorities and, yeah, those public offices, and it wasn't always very pleasant. But then I decided I wanted to move to Rio de Janeiro. And then I had a business as well, again, another brick and mortar business. And there, again, had to deal with this similar problems, but this time also with a fraudulent business partners. So the cherry on the
Oh,
cake.
wow.
Right? So that was what actually eventually had me pivot, because once I had opened that business, it was already open. It was all, we had a huge house built out. And then I found out about this. And that's what actually eventually didn't make my business. It was no longer sustainable to keep it open, because it depended to a large extent on that partner's name, although the business was technically speaking mine, right? So it's a long story, but anyway, I decided to dismantle this business, which I had put all my love and all my lots of time, again, all my money into. And then I moved to New York City, and at first it was decided that it would be forever or for good, but and nothing in my life is forever anyway, I think. But I wanted to split my time between the two locations, actually, because I loved Rio de Janeiro. It's beautiful. I don't know if you've ever been there, Daniel.
No, I haven't been there.
Not yet.
What made you decide to go to Argentina in the first place?
I have been to Argentina and to Brazil before. So now I had been there through BCG and through a startup as well. And the first time I went was actually through BCG on a shorter project that was after I had spent about 6 months in Sao Paulo to help them open an office in Sao Paulo. I'd also worked for BCG in Spain for 7 years, and I'd helped them open an office in Portugal too. So I spoke Portuguese, European Portuguese, which is quite different, but at least that. And then I had spent some time in Sao Paulo, Brazil, as I said, and from there in Argentina. And then I went back to Europe for a couple of years. And then actually, and that was still with BCG. And then actually a BCG alum called me and said, hey, do you want to help us here in Buenos Aires with our startup? And I did go. The thing is, a few months later, 10 months later or so, the economic crisis hit really hard in Argentina, and they basically couldn't pay me anymore. I was also not on their payroll. I was an external consultant. So BCG hired me back actually for their San Francisco office, and that's how I got to the US for the first time. And then I went back to Argentina because I had this dream somehow that came up for me, and it was this idea, and it was this calling from south in a way. This voice is saying, hey, come back. So that's how I got there. And eventually then later in end of 2011, beginning of 2012, I moved to New York City. And that's when I started working on my current business, like first networking, because I did not have a network, and learning and all that stuff, because I had no idea how a business like this worked. It was completely different. And yeah, once again, I was there learning by doing, and also at the same time getting coaching. And of course, yes, putting some tools and some knowledge under my belt as well.
You talk a lot about like freedom as a core value, and it's really important. What does like freedom mean to you? I think some people have different definitions of what freedom is. So what does freedom mean to you, and why is it so important to like leadership?
Yeah, first of all, you might think that to me, freedom is being able to move around, and it's certainly a part of it. Okay, because I thrive in movement, I thrive in change. Not everybody does, but that's me. So yes, to me, it is important to be able to move when it's time for me to move again. I love to dance also, so that's also movement, right? Dance is also always a part of it. And dance is also about freedom, by the way. It's about the freedom to express yourself. It's about the freedom to interpret the music in your own way. But having said that, freedom isn't a location, it's a mindset. And it's not even just a mindset, it's a way of being. And I believe that, a lot of people always want to be free from something, freedom from disease, freedom from poverty, freedom from whatnot. But I want to have the freedom to create the life that I want to live, although not everything always seems perfect in that life. That's totally fine, but it needs to be my life. That's what matters. And that's my freedom. That's my personal freedom. That involves the work I do as well. And I believe that leaders also need to be able to find what freedom means to them. Because otherwise, in the long run, it's not satisfactory to lead anybody, to lead a team or an organization or your own business, whatever it is, right? Freedom is also about authenticity, really. The freedom to be you, to show up as you with what you want to create, with the life you want to create for yourself included. Because when you are a leader of a business, for example, an entrepreneur, let's say, and you're leading your team, but you yourself are unhappy, first of all, that will reflect on your team. But second, also, what's the point? A lot of businesses actually have been created because people wanted freedom. And in the end, they became the slaves to their businesses. And I know I'm not saying this lightheartedly because I've gone through ups and downs in my business too. 2020, all my engagements for the entire year up until September were all of a sudden gone. And it was all in person, Daniel. I mean, I don't coach my clients in person usually. I coach them online for sure, but all my lead gen was happening in person. My networking, or most of it, let's say, so networking, speaking, where I would then get clients from because they got to know me through my talks and through my presentations. So that's just one example, right? But we go through those phases, and sometimes we need to completely pivot. You mentioned you used that word before, and within our businesses, and just reinvent what we want to do there. I don't even want to say reinvent ourselves because we are not reinventing who we are. I think as we move along in life and as we gain clarity, we're actually getting closer to who we are in our essence. We're not becoming someone else. We are just peeling away layers and then finding out, okay, what do I want to do next? And maybe hopefully that's even closer to who we truly are, right?
So do you recommend, I'm just curious, do you recommend when you're working with your clients, do you recommend that they travel to like different countries in different continents as a way of giving you more personal growth? Like for you said, help you a lot with your personal growth. Is that something do you recommend to your clients that say, hey, travel can really help you see different perspectives, it can help you with your personal growth?
In my opinion, it's always beneficial to do that because it does open up your horizon, but people are different. I'm not going to impose onto my clients that they have to have the same interests or the same preferences or the same ways to grow as I have had. There are different ways to grow. And also in my book, my recent book is called Living My Freaking Amazing Life, Create the Life That's Perfect for You anywhere in the world. But that doesn't mean you have to travel and move around as much as I did. It just needs to resonate with you, with what you desire, with what you would like to experience. And it needs to be aligned with who you are and what you want this to look like. And for some people, that's not traveling. And by the way, I also learned a lot. I used to read so many books in the past. I still do, but now I focus mostly on personal development and work-related stuff when I read. But I used to read a lot of fiction that actually had tremendous amounts of information about the location and the culture where the book was playing included. For example, about places in Latin America that I later maybe traveled to, but not had not traveled to by the time I read those books. And I learned so much about, those cultures, about the people, about the way they lived. I remember also very clearly a book about India, and it was a historically based book about a family, and it taught me so much. And I've never been to India. I know people from India, of course. And there's also, as you talk to other people, you may live in a village where there's not a huge diversity of people from other places, but maybe you live in a big city and you can talk to people from all over the world if you want to. There's so many ways. I think what's really always important is that it resonates with who you are. And what is your goal even through this? So what do you want to achieve with it for yourself?
So I know you'll have these different leadership frameworks. Can you walk us through what is like the powerful leadership transformational framework?
Yeah.
And why is that like a game changer for like leaders? Like why is this so like special?
Yeah. So the powerful leadership transformation was actually my very first framework. It is mostly about self-leadership. So it has 4 pillars. And the first one is a self-empowering mindset and heartset. The second is called distinctive uniqueness. So that's all about your unique brilliance and what to focus on in terms of what you want to develop. Then the third is a body and energy conscious presence, because we talk a lot about executive presence, but what does that really mean? And why don't we talk more about energy in that context if it's so key, as I have found? And then the fourth pillar is called inspired and effective action, which is basically a result of the other three. Now, this already, although it seems it doesn't include so many things, but it includes a lot already. The thing was, to me, what was missing a little bit here was the verbal communication piece and the trust building through verbal communication. So I added a methodology on that was not mine specifically, but I studied as a coach, which is conversational intelligence. So that was a perfect complement for this first framework. And later then I created some other frameworks. One is specifically the foundation for my coaching of leaders. And it's the Thriving Leader Formula. And then there are others like the New Paradigm Leadership, which is more focused on team leadership. But having said that, even if you focus on powerful leadership transformation, of course, this changes how you show up for your team and in front of your team, and it will impact your team leadership, of course. And it also can be transferred to your team. So if you want to do that more actively, you could pick some pieces and teach them.
So I saw you also have a framework called the Conversational Intelligence, the CIQ. How does that fit into leadership communication?
CIQ is not my own framework, as I mentioned earlier. That is one created by the Creating We team. And I studied it as a coach. There are specific coach programs where you can study it. It focuses a lot on verbal communication, on using inclusive language, language that makes sure everybody is heard and seen and included. And it has a lot of really cool tools to build trust within teams and among teams. It also helps us navigate more successfully through team conversations, any other conversations tool, like negotiations, whatever it is for everybody.
Before we got on this podcast, we were talking for a few minutes, and you talked about the importance about leading yourself before leading others. What does that mean to lead yourself?
Yeah, so in my opinion, a leader is not necessarily someone who has a lot of followers, right? That's not what a leader is. We can say, okay, you lead your own life. And do you lead it proactively, or do you just float along in your life? So that's the difference here in terms of leadership. And and then of course, we can be team leaders. We can be leaders of communities. There are other examples of leadership. That's what involves people, other people apart from ourselves. That's, of course, also leadership. And we can lead organizations. And that oftentimes also includes the team leadership, of course. So to me, leadership is really about having a direction. So you decide, this is the direction I want to move on. And you can always change directions. That's of course allowed, because sometimes when we set a GPS in our car, we want to go in a certain direction, then we find a better place, right? So then we change direction. That's totally fine. But yes, you want to determine a direction, and then you want to make the decision to walk in that direction and do everything it takes to get there. In my book, for example, Living My Freaking Amazing Life, Create the Life That's Perfect for You Anywhere in the World, that is a description of my own eclectic journey. But again, as I said, that's how I led myself through my life. Was it always perfect? No. It was perfect for me, though, in a way, because I had certain experiences that allowed me to grow. And I think when you always take your adversity and use it as an opportunity instead, or just consider it as an experience neutrally, then that's actually a great way to approach life. And always see, okay, what can I do with that now as the leader of my life, so that I can have that life of thriving and of really feeling alive and not feeling fully alive and not half dead as a lot of people live their lives. We know that, right? It's for some people, it's really about, okay, go to work to make some money, come home, TV, and that's it. And that's not how I, at least, want to experience my life. So I don't want to live my life passively. I don't want to just be swept along. Yes, take opportunities that come my way. Not all of them also. Use discernment. But yeah, grab opportunities for sure. I've done that. But then also become more conscious along the way, become more aware, because consciousness is what we are anyway, right? This consciousness is sometimes calling in our human bodies to do something. And when we ignore it, it usually feels yucky. It feels off. And we realize that we're no longer living the life that we actually would like to live. So it becomes meaningless and unsatisfactory. And so that's what I also mean with. So that's why also one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because I wanted to inspire people to take charge of their lives, to first of all, figure out what it really is that they would prefer to experience, rather than going by other people's expectations or wishes, as we so often do without even noticing. And then take that next step and make a decision and take a step in that direction, and then see where it leads you. Not everything is going to be perfectly lined out from the beginning. That's totally fine. It's in uncertainty that there are millions of possibilities.
Let's talk about your book for a moment, because you mentioned you wrote the book, Living My Freaking Amazing Life. Can you maybe share with the audience like one of the stories that's in the book so we can have a better understanding of what's really about?
Yeah, for example, I mentioned a few stories already, like the Brazil fraudulent business partner, and then when I moved to Buenos Aires. There were some previous stories. For example, when I moved to Spain at the age of 26, I just had learned Spanish. I had just started studying Spanish. Why did I move to Spain? Because a colleague said to me, there's this opportunity in Spain. And I said, at the time, I had this mindset, oh, but I don't speak Spanish. And he said, you can learn that. And at the time, it was like, oh, if you hadn't studied it at school, it's not a possibility. That was the mindset I and some other people had back then. And of course, that's not the truth. So I said, yeah, you're actually right. And then I took this opportunity. About 10 months later, I was promoted into a leadership role for which I had absolutely zero background experience. None of that, probably because somebody saw that potential in me, and because I had been quite proactive in my approaches, wanting to always improve processes, bring new ways of doing, right? And when that person in that job left, it was offered to me. I was a candidate. Okay. I wasn't automatically pushed into this position. I did also interview for it together with some external candidates who did have leadership experience, though. And I got the job. And that's how I grew into this leadership role with probably authentic intentions, just really wanting to do my best. And that's what people must have felt, because they were actually more supportive than I had first thought. My fear was a bit like, okay, there are all these amazing people and they are not being asked to be a candidate for this. And I just arrived 10 months earlier and just learned the language. And what's going to happen with these people? Are they going to be jealous? But you know what? There was none of that. And it was really awesome. So that's one of those experiences. Then I have a lot of really cool, very adventurous travel stories in the book. Because from each of those stories, I learned a leadership lesson, either for the leadership of myself or others or both, right? So I also included a leadership lesson or learning at the end of each chapter to not just tell my adventures, and and share a piece of my life, but also really make it meaningful for the reader in that sense. So you could say it's the somewhat different leadership book.
Thank you for sharing that. It sounds really interesting. Can't wait to read it myself.
Please do.
You talk a lot about the importance of authenticity. How can the leaders be authentic when they're working in difficult situations? Like you said, sometimes you have a partner that's corrupt governments, corrupt
Yeah.
politicians, or like risky situations. How can you be authentic in the difficult situations?
For example, you mentioned corruption. When I stayed true to myself, I never paid anybody off. It was not the easier way out. I was one of 44 bed and breakfasts back then in Buenos Aires. The business at the time was actually booming, and they would show up and want you to pay them off. And I didn't do that. It's also interesting because they asked me to open I had an investor's visa, Daniel. And so I had to open the business within 12 months. I had to employ a person. I had to do the build out, everything. And the build out wasn't as automated as one might want it to be, right? So it took, but I managed to open. It wasn't the easiest task, but I did it. And I had my first guest even before the deadline. So what didn't happen before the deadline was they didn't give you the license before the deadline. So that's all I could think. That's on purpose. Now, I'm not saying it is, but it makes me think so because I actually never got that license, although I had actually submitted everything on time and right away. And later I found out that most of them actually didn't have them because it was just how that was handled. No, I didn't pay anybody off. It would have been so much easier. I found out also that I found out also that most other businesses probably did pay them off because so I went to court and I actually won the case. So that was a pretty nice win, just an acknowledgement. Nobody paid for the expenses, but still. So that was one to stay there, stay my ground as a leader, one example. Another, there's a misconception, right? That being authentic is harder than not being authentic. And I believe that's actually not true. Because when you practice self-awareness, self-discovery, then you also become more aware of what your unique brilliance is. What does that exactly consist of? And you can use it much more easily in your leadership. You can find out what your superpowers are as a leader, to call it something. And that's one piece of it. And then the second piece of it, it's so much more strenuous to constantly play a role than to actually show up as your authentic self. Once you have that self-awareness, people will actually see that authenticity shine through you. And they will trust you more easily. Your team will trust you more easily. It will be easier to build trust in all directions because people know that what they see is what they get. And you become more credible in that way, actually. And I believe that a lot of leaders in corporate also, I was a bit disappointed, frankly, because I expected a bit more in the last few years about standing up for their values. And I think a lot of people actually didn't do that. There's also a lot of misinformation, of course, and a lot of conditioning and programming of the leaders themselves. They are not exempt from this. However, there were also a lot of leaders who just didn't dare speak up. And I think that is, to me, that's sad to see. Okay. So I would have wished that we could have had more people speaking up and protecting their teams because that's also part of leadership. But I do believe that what applies to us as individuals also applies to the leadership concept that we create our reality. So we always say our inner world creates our outer world. That is a bit simplified, right? But that includes your mindset. That includes, in my opinion, also your heart set, your emotion set, your energy set, to call it something. And that all together and a few more things create your outer world. And when you have a grip on that, when you actually know what that all looks like and what you would like it to look like and how you would like to be perceived, and once that's aligned with how you are actually perceived, I think that's when things become actually easier.
So
If
you
that
talk
makes
a
sense.
lot about humanizing the workplace. What are like the first steps leaders should take to create like a trust and human-based culture, in your opinion?
Yeah. So I think what leads to that humanization is also included in the new paradigm leadership framework that I've created. I believe we need to bring new paradigms and really let go of old, outdated paradigms these days. What has brought us so far isn't necessarily what's going to take us to the next level, right? Just like in personal life too. So I do believe that we need to focus a bit more on the fact that humans are the heart of the organization and treat them as such, right? Because, and how do we do this? Well, through, for example, more heart-centered leadership. And what does that mean? Heart is one of the four elements of this new paradigm leadership, just to be clear. And you can look all of that up on my frameworks page of my website, transformyourperformance.com. So what do I mean by heart here? First of all, that focus on people being the heart of the organization, that recognition and acknowledgement, and then also realizing that we connect with the world around us, including the people around us, through our hearts and through the electromagnetic frequency of the heart. We could talk about the heart and heart set all day long, because it's usually the heart is where we find courage. Fear is in our minds, courage is in our hearts. It's where we find our intuition, which is hugely underrated in business, and so on. Yeah, that's one of the elements of it. And then there are other elements, of course, also communication, mindset, trust building, and all of that flows into it too. But all of this is really, so the framework's main goal is to create more engaged and happier teams, and to also create thriving leaders with thriving teams, as I like to say.
So I'm curious to ask you like a question on the flip side. Like, what are your thoughts about AI? Because you're talking about human beings, the part of the heart, and I agree with you, those things are really important. It seems like the direction a lot of us are going is it's almost the opposite. Like AI seems to be taking over almost every aspect of our lives now, in business and our personal lives. A lot of people now are not even using Google anymore. They're using like ChatGPT to do research. So how do you like balance like the human aspects and the heart emotional aspects when this technology of AI seems to be very prevalent leadership in business and even our personal lives?
Yeah, so in terms of research, especially when you're looking for, okay, what's going on in the world, I wouldn't probably necessarily have used Google anyway, but I would probably have chosen other search machines. And so I think that's still relevant, even if you use ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is programmed by somebody, and it's programmed by people who maybe want you to go in a certain direction. I don't know how exactly it works. I use it, but I frankly don't have the knowledge exactly of what's in the background. I believe that the purpose, of course, of AI, ideally for humans, would be to use it to our benefit, as with everything, right? We want to use it to our benefit to help us no longer do tedious tasks, maybe, and to help us process information faster and whatnot, or set up processes. I'm not the AI expert. Okay, I want to say that very quickly, very clearly. Yes, there is. I do see a risk there. I do see a risk, of course. Yeah, AI is directed by people who may not always have our best interest in mind. Uh, some of it is not. So it really depends on how it's used. It's like with everything that we have at our hands, all our resources. I could use a knife to kill somebody, or I could use a knife to prepare food. And I don't have control over how it's going to be used. That's all I know. And I do have faith in humanity, though, that our consciousness is coming through more and more, I believe, on the other hand. On purpose, not saying consciousness is evolving, because consciousness already is, but our awareness is evolving, our awareness of that consciousness. And I think we also got to see that part, right? So where are we headed? I don't know. In organizations, is there a certain risk of jobs going away? For sure. There's also a possibility of jobs coming in because of AI. So frankly, I'm not the best forecaster for this.
So now that you've lived in many different countries and worked with a lot of different types of people and backgrounds, is there like a certain like recurrent theme or like challenges that a lot of your clients have, no matter what country they live in?
Yeah, as leaders, I think most clients have problems delegating, or delegating in the wrong way. I believe it would be really beneficial to learn how to delegate with growth in mind and make that your goal when it comes to delegation. So that's one of the things. Another one is just really also, I believe, not trusting ourselves enough sometimes as leaders, and therefore not trusting other people. And that again has to do with delegation too. Because we expect our team to trust us. We want to build that trust in our team. But what about the other way around? Do we trust our teams enough to give them tasks that are not purely administrative, that also include decision power and things like that? So yeah, I think there are common challenges for sure. Also, sometimes, of course, we have very traditional systems that have a lot of hierarchy. That's not probably very productive and beneficial to sustainable leadership.
So in today's like fast-paced, changing world, we talk about things like the AI and everything's changing so fast. How can leaders stay ahead of the curve?
It depends on the role, I would say. There are roles where it's really important to be on top of AI, and there are other roles where that might not be your first priority, right? We have management functions, tasks, and leadership tasks. So it depends really a lot on the role, I would say. Of course, as business owners, you almost cannot get around learning at least some AI. And in certain jobs, like it or not, you can't either, or else you will just maybe find a different role. But I believe we've always had to keep up. Have you always done it? Maybe not, but we've always had to keep up in order to really keep growing. And that doesn't look the same for everybody and for every single role. So again, I'm not the AI expert, so it's probably not the best idea for me to inspire people around AI. I do other things, but yeah, I also have to, of course, keep myself updated with certain things that are not necessarily the most fun for me.
Can you maybe like share like the story of how you help one of your clients with their transformation? Like they came to you with a challenge or a problem, and you either help them coach them through it or provide a solution. Do you have any stories like about one of your clients you can share with our audience?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I work both with employees and business owners, and mostly business owners with teams, right? Because they come for the leadership, although there are also people who come for leadership of self for the most part and really want to break through the depths of their inner limitations. That's definitely a specialty I have. Now, the employees sometimes would come with the goal of a promotion, a raise, the typical goals, or just really to work on their leadership skills because they were promoted into a leadership role also with not a huge load of experience, and they might feel a bit insecure in that role at the beginning. So these are some typical scenarios. And yes, I've helped people negotiate considerable salary increases. We talk like $50,000 and things like that. It's not the same for everybody because it also depends on where you start, of course. So that's one piece. Then for the business owners, I could give you the example of a co-owner of a co-working space. And she was really wanting to communicate more effectively with her team, increase ownership in her team, and with it, of course, also productivity is the typical things that we want in a team, right? We want them to be more engaged. We also want them to be happy where they are because we don't want to replace team members all the time. It's very costly in both time and money. So that's what we worked on. And her team, actually, after just a few weeks, actually asked her and told her, you know what? You've made all those changes. This is really awesome. They gave her compliments. And so she told them that she was getting coaching, and they really appreciate that.
Regina, if someone had any questions about a conversation today or they're interested in working with you, what are the best ways they can reach out to you?
Yeah, through my website, transformyourperformance.com. There's a contact page. You could also just email me at regina@transformyourperformance.com. I know it's a bit long, so that's why I send people to the contact page. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on other social media too. I have a YouTube channel. My books are on Amazon. But yeah, everything is really centralized also on my website.
Regina, I really enjoyed talking with you, but we're running out of time on this podcast. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience before we end our conversation for today?
Maybe if you are, because there are probably different people in different places, entrepreneurs, employees, and so on. But everybody needs to lead their lives, right? So how can one start the process of going toward the version of one's, what I call freaking amazing life? And I have a suggestion for that. So start by asking, if no one had an opinion about my choices, what would I create? And then take some small steps toward that today. So freedom grows with each step.
Oh, it's wonderful. I really like that advice because sometimes I second guess myself. And I think I get worried about how people are judge what I think or do. Regina, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show. I really enjoyed talking with you and listening to all your experiences, especially about traveling to different countries. So thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all about your wisdom and experiences with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for having me on, for being a wonderful, welcoming host. I've very much enjoyed this conversation too, and I hope your listeners do too.